So I will start by reading the formalities. This open meeting of the Groveland Zoning Board of Appeals is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's Executive Order of March 12, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of the COVID-19 virus, we have been advised and directed by the Commonwealth to suspend public gatherings. And as such, the governor's order suspends the requirement for the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of the public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. For this meeting, the Groveland Planning Board is convening a video conference via Zoom as posted on the town's website, identifying how the public may join. Please note that the meeting is being recorded and that some attendees are participating by video conference. And with that, I'd like to open the Zoning Board of Appeals meeting for October 21st at 7:34 p.m. And the only thing on our agenda for tonight is the continuation of application 2019-3 for Sewell Street, Groveland Realty Trust, LLC, care of William Daly. Requests a comprehensive permit pursuant to the provisions of the MGL 40B 20-23 and 760 CMR 56. Construct 192 apartment units in 4 residential buildings, a clubhouse with related amenities such as a pool and associated access ways, sidewalks, parking, utilities, and stormwater infrastructure located in the industrial zoning district. I'd like to make a motion to reopen the public discussion on the application.
Seconded.
All those in favor? Kathy Franzen? Did that actually get that? Can't hear you, Kathy. You're unmuted, but you're not hearing anything. All right, Chris Goodwin.
Aye.
And John Stokes.
Aye.
All right. We'll give Kathy a minute, even though she can hear us, we can't hear her yet, so. I believe there's 2 things, the updates and continuation of Paul's draft. And we did get some clarity some additional details.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Sorry. Thank you.
Have tech support.
So first I wanted to start by just asking if there are any questions or comments on the document from Equity Alliance on the impervious area calculations, frontage, and some of the crosswalk details and parking counts.
I just
I
wanted to
actually
make
did
sure.
have one. Oh, go ahead. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I just had the question about, it talks about the frontage. So I know we had discussed briefly the Nelson Street frontage. I wasn't sure if you guys were able to come up with a number on that. Just so it's included, that's all. For the record.
I'll get that Nelson Street frontage number. Would you like UPTAC also?
Yeah, if you have it, that would be great. I just think it should just go on the record because there is a section in the decision about that as well.
Okay,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
That was my only question, Jason.
All right. I guess we can continue walking through Paul's draft. Do we want to, I mean, I just wanted to, does the board want to review any of the updates? Any questions or issues on the updates that were made first before we jump back into wherever we left off? If I can remember where that is.
Mr. Chairman, in the version that I sent out tonight, it includes a number of, pretty much all of the proposed revisions that came from the applicants. I wasn't able to give it to you in the form with the applicant's changes tracked because I had already made changes to my version. So their version wasn't consistent with my version at that point. So I just had to add them into my version. So you'll see track changes that come under my name, but they were actually, most of them proposed by the applicant. The other changes to this draft decision are the conditions proposed by Kathy. I've included those as well. There's a couple spots where I thought, we could have a little bit of discussion, so I had a better understanding as to exactly what the conditions should be. But for the most part, they're fairly.
All right. Anything in particular we want to address on the additions to the draft? I mean, we can go back through, obviously go back through a few times, but if we need to.
I didn't have any concerns with Kathy's conditions. I don't know if the applicant has had the opportunity to review those conditions and if they have any concerns. In my draft, there are a number of spots where I have additional comments on proposed conditions that came from the applicant. I don't agree with all of the proposed changes, or I've had concerns with a few of them where I've noted that. But overall, I didn't think that they were much of a concern.
Paul, was there anything before section F that either was added by Kathy, yourself, or problematic, since that's where we were going to start off?
Let me go back through and see.
See a little discrepancy at E28, Paul, but again, not much of one on the signage, our addition there.
Well, so here's one of the concerns that I have. So it seems that the applicant is requesting that the board make no decision with regards to waiver on the signage, and essentially is seeking that waiver to be determined post-permit. I don't see how the board can do that. They need to make all of their determinations as part of their permit. If the applicant wants to come back to the board and provide, a definitive set of plans showing what would need to be waived, you can always do it through a modification request and ask to add waivers for those. But I don't think the board can designate the power to grant a waiver to Rebecca or to any other entity post-permit. The board has to be the grants the waivers.
Well, I think they could. I mean, again, if the board wants us to submit a sign, obviously we can, but I think the board, looking at it from a nuanced sense, could essentially grant the waiver in spirit, subject to either their further or the zoning administrator's blessing of the appropriateness of the sign. I mean, I understand exactly what you're saying, Paul, and I'd rather avoid further process under the project change requirements. If we end up going another night, then I suppose that it's not a big deal either way, because I'm sure the crew could hustle and put together a sign plan. But if we ended up being ready to close tonight, I think maybe we should figure out a way to do it.
Okay.
Joel, you're muted.
It's going to be like the debate tomorrow night.
Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. So there's really two categories of signage, and we've done nothing to really prepare to address it. And there's the internal driveway signage, right? Those are as you come up into it to designate how you to navigate within it, how the signage might be placed in the building, which in part, all of this is driven in also within the fire department, ensuring that they can properly navigate to it. So there's all this internal stuff, including speed limits and things like that. And then there is the ground sign at the street. And I can understand certainly the issue of wanting to have us come back and talk about the ground sign, since that has the greatest visibility. But maybe we can bifurcate it out and give Rebecca some power on internal signage for those purposes, and then come back to the board for the one that deals with the signage along the frontage that has exposure to other residents in the town. Just an idea.
So I don't see the signage as being a big deal. My only concern is limited to the board having to grant the waiver as part of its hearing process.
Right.
Rather than essentially grant a waiver after the hearing has been closed and the decision has been issued. And that's where my concern is. Certainly if the applicant comes back with a set of plans that shows the signage and no waivers required, then there's no issue or concerns. It would just move forward. That's sort of the additional fine details, that you would see in a final plan set. The only concern is if that then shows that there is a waiver necessary. I don't think there's any entity other than the board that can be authorized to grant that waiver.
So I'll defer to Bill and Joel if they don't mind coming back. And even if they had to do it as an insubstantial change, Paul, then that's fine with them, fine with me. Otherwise, I think there's a way we could do it procedurally, but I suppose that's just for lawyers to discuss. So not all
I
together.
would presume if you're coming back with something, that doesn't look like a billboard,
Right.
Yeah, and don't forget the backlight that we want to zoom up to the sky every night too. With
then
the
it would be more likely than not, it would be determined to be an insubstantial change.
how about we do this?
Knowing exactly what it, is going to be proposed, you can't really commit to anything.
We are not prepared tonight probably to proclaim. Again, I'd be surprised if we actually close the hearing tonight. So why don't you give us a chance to consider that? And if we feel that something needs to be proposed prior to closing, we will. If not, we'll come back after to this board at a later date. This is not a deal stopper here either.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, I tend to agree with Paul. I'm a little leery of doing a sign waiver without actually seeing anything. And I don't feel like I want to make sure that there is some sort of review. Do we need to be a giant production after this is all over? No, not necessarily. That's how I feel. But I feel like maybe coming back with an insubstantial change probably is the way to go. But to do a full waiver at this point, I'm a little uncomfortable with that because I haven't seen it. Because it could be a bad sign. I don't know. And if I waive it, then what? Then the town lynches me.
Yeah,
So-
we don't disagree, Kathy. We don't have a problem with the direction we're going, and it'll give us until next week if we decide, or next time we have a meeting, if we decide there's something of importance that we want to address, we'll come back and ask you all before we close the hearing out. But other than that, we agree.
And when I'm representing a board, I always want to make sure, and it's the same for when I'm representing an applicant. I always want to make sure that the board is specifically aware of the waivers that they are granting. Because if the board can be shown to have granted waivers that they were not aware of the nature of that waiver, that opens the decision up to a claim by an abutter appeal that the board was acting in a manner that was arbitrary and capricious. So I always prefer to have more information in regard to waivers than have less information.
Thank you for that.
Paul,
So-
question so I think that's fine. I don't know exactly what you mean on your comment to A8. Again, we didn't make any proposed changes there.
That might be an old comment.
And we didn't add anything or subtract anything. I wasn't quite sure I got it, what you were commenting on.
What section was that again? I'm sorry.
A8.
Thank you.
I think that he first off was pointing to A7 and mistakenly used his computer to point to A8. Because when I read it, it seems to be referring to the word.
That's absolutely correct, Joel. I somehow stuck.
That's fine. I mean, the word response as opposed to approval is perfectly fine. I think that's appropriate, so.
And so that's what that comment was intended to address.
Okay,
Why I changed that word from approval to
Okay.
response.
got it. Got it.
So just a quick question. We just went through this with the sign permit, but I'm kind of wondering, just mostly procedural, how it would work, Paul, because we have not seen a landscape plan. So if you actually look at section, hold on, there was a whole section about the landscaping.
Yep.
Since we haven't actually seen a plan, do we change the wording on that, or what is the procedure for that? Because like, I don't want to give a
Unless
waiver.
so the distinction we're talking about is the granting of waivers
Yep.
as opposed to, just the granting of the permit. So what we're saying, and it's the landscaping plan information is under section C1D. So this is presuming that there aren't any waivers being granted with regard to landscaping, and all this is setting forth the information that needs to be depicted on the final plans as it relates to landscaping, so that the board can approve those final plans administratively, showing the full landscaping details.
I just wanted to make sure it wasn't the same situation as a
It's not.
sign,
It's
so
very
thank you
different.
for the clarification.
Mhm. So I really didn't have anything substantive before E28 other than what we just discussed. So if we're ready to start with section F, I think that there probably will be some discussion on the traffic issues.
Probably. So, I know the questions that I had about traffic, you guys were nice enough to send over the information for the crosswalk detail, which is great. Thank you very much. I just wanted to make sure that there's language in the condition that states this, how this is going to be set up. That's really what I was after. So thank you for sending that over. And then the other question I had, and I sort of alluded to it last time, and I don't know where you guys stand on it, is sightline easement with Greenwood Auto Body. Has anyone actually spoken to them, or is there any?
Well, Kathy, when we did this and had the traffic gurus in and discussed specifically the sightline, that's why item number 5 was added to the letter, is that when the drawings were provided to show sightlines, they did not show any issue. And if you look at then the aerial photograph, that it was not problematic. Now, if the abutter parks his vehicles, which he does, as I understand, occasionally within the right of way, then he's not parking them legally. And obviously he will be asked, but we don't require, assuming he's not parking in the middle of the road, we're not asking for any waivers there because we have adequate sightlines. And that was
Okay,
related, we had a lot of discussion about that at the time.
Right, I just wanted to kind of circle back and see, because a lot of time had elapsed and whether there was any discussion about it, if anything had happened with that at all, that's all. I
Okay.
was just sort of circling back, really.
And that's why I added that as number 5 in the letter to cover your question, because I know you were concerned about that.
Thank you.
I wanted to make sure I got an A for my homework.
You did very well, thank you. Did anyone else on the board have any other traffic concerns, conditions they wanted to address, talk about?
Kathy, you also had something that referenced upgrades on Sewell Street.
Oh, that's right. I sort of had it in a different section, but yes. So I think my question was more about now, because Sewell Street is a private way, right? Or it's a shared way. It was more about the upkeep of Sewell Street going forward. So as far as
Upkeep, it's not upgrades. Okay.
I'm sorry.
So you were looking for really something having to do with the upkeep of Sewell Street rather than upgrades to it.
Right. Obviously, he's going to have to upgrade it a little bit because it's very skinny now. And I know he's got plans to, bring everything into the development. So I just want to make sure that the upkeep of Sewell Street is now going to be part of the project.
From our perspective, the answer is yes, we need to plow it and maintain it for accessibility, since this is the access for our residents and staff to be on site. And we certainly do not want anybody to get in trouble because of it's an improperly maintained road. So we don't have a problem with that.
Okay. I just wanted that on the record. That's all. Because I know it's kind of a funny street and it's got right of ways and funny things going on with it. So I just want to make sure that was on the record.
All right, so I would add F5, the applicant shall be responsible for the upgrade and maintenance of Sewell Street to ensure proper access to the project. Cover it?
Yes, I think that covers my concern. Thank you.
The upgrades, Paul, really referenced the plans that have been presented that shows the width and the pavement. So I'm not even sure the word upgrades is so much required as maintenance, because that's already shown on the plans as submitted.
Right. I just wanted, because obviously you're going to upgrade it because you're going to have to. But
Correct.
then, the maintenance going forward, like I don't want the town to end up having to
No.
deal with it at some, so I just want it stated in the conditions. That's all.
We
So
we
it's
will never,
clear.
we will never
10 years
apply
from now when
to,
it comes up. That's all.
we will never apply to make this a public street.
Okay.
To cover the traffic section.
Anyone else on the board?
And then Kathy, you had a lot of additional conditions under police, fire, and emergency medical.
Well, I had not necessarily conditions, but maybe discussion / conditions that, again, just sort of for the record, things that have already been stated, but I just want to make sure it gets into the decision. So the first one was that the applicant will provide Knox box for all buildings for police and fire. During construction, applicant will work with the fire department so it can gain access to all areas. Because I think that was the biggest concern of the fire department, was that if a fire was to occur, it's most likely going to happen during construction. So I
That's
just
been
wanna
added
make
as
sure that-
condition G2.
And Kathy, again, I just want to say, and it really goes to probably a few of these items in here, is that when you refer to stairwells as an example, I'm just jumping because it's to make a point, it has to be fire rated. Well, they have to meet building codes and they have to meet fire department regulations. So by stipulating in here a specific code, instead of saying they meet all applicable building codes and fire codes, you actually limit yourself, to be quite honest, should the building or the fire code change and become more stringent. So, I mean, that is what the intention, but we haven't yet proposed an interior design of spaces. So that it may, you know, and there's no building plans that are attached to this at this stage. So isn't really the focus to be compliant with those requirements? And, you know, so that goes to the knock box and, you know,
Yes. I just want, so where this came from is this is actually what you guys proposed. So
Oh,
this
and I
actually came from
understand
your
that.
proposal. So
I
I was just
understand that.
trying to restate it, basically.
To make clear, the board in its decision in no way, shape or form has the authority to reduce the requirements under the state building code, under the fire code, NFPA, anything like that. So it doesn't matter what you put in here, the applicant is still subject to all of those other state and federal codes.
Okay.
And if we don't mind bouncing around, another comment is you said we have to have backup generator. That's true. If it's a 4-story building over podium parking, the answer is yes. If for some reason the decision as board was to reduce the number of units and it became something less, we don't necessarily need a backup generator. It's not required by code for a 3-story walk-up as an example. So, I mean, it's very specific in NFPA about what happens when it becomes a 4-story building versus a 3-story building. And that's
Well,
again,
if it's a 3-story building, it doesn't have to have an elevator.
correct.
But if it does have an elevator, it doesn't matter how many stories there are, it has to have an emergency backup.
Well, actually, typically in a 3-story, no, it has to then go to the ground floor. The purpose of a 4-story should be accessibility to a fire department should they have to get somebody out of the building afterwards. But actually, Paul, it doesn't say that. But I'm not going to fight over the point. I'm just saying that it's very specific when there are codes that refer to it that we have to adhere to. And other than that, that's fine.
Okay.
So the next one I had was, I just want to make sure that the fire access that we discussed to all 4 sides of the building for each of the buildings, I just want to make sure that that is forever kept. I just don't want there to be any site changes, 20 years from now where they want to try to eliminate that. So that's sort of the intention. How that gets documented, I don't know. I just wanted to these were sort of really my random notes of things that I had come across as I went through everything. So I don't know how that gets documented, Paul, if there is a way to do that, or I just wanted to make sure that it didn't get changed later on down the road.
I've included them as conditions.
Okay.
Yeah,
Good.
well, if we're
I've
going to
got
do
10
that,
conditions G2 through G11 that reflect all of your comments, Gavin.
I'd like to just sort of, by the time we're done, I'm going to suggest that Jason and Paul work through some language. For instance, I have a issue with the G9, and we say, and shall have a superintendent on site. We're not having 24-hour superintendent on site, so that needs to be sort of recast. That's broader than the intention. We're going to have professional management. The management will have staff time during typically the week. We have on-call people that would be responsible for it, but there's not going to be a superintendent on site at all times, 24/7.
Actually, before we get into that, I want to take a step back on the question around the fire access. I'm trying to flip through some of the most recent changes, but as far as those fire access roads, are we requiring signage for those to ensure that they are known to be fire access roads and not just general? Is that in the stipulations? I'm trying to find the.
We did actually add a provision requiring in F1, the emergency access over Nelson Street shall be gated and may only be utilized by authorized emergency vehicles.
No, I was more thinking of the road that goes around the back, particularly of the building. I think it was building 3. They added a road for fire access explicitly
Okay.
to cover that.
Be part of the signage.
Yeah.
Jason, what are you suggesting that they be signed so similar to a fire lane, no, so that civilians can't park there and everything? Is that? the
Yeah,
intent?
yeah, just, to make sure that it's known, a sign needs, wherever makes sense, close to the axis of the road, that it is a fire access road and it shouldn't be blocked by people just, delivery trucks or parking or whatever.
We agree with that, Jason.
I don't know if that's
No,
included in the general signage, require, or if it was called out anywhere in the general signage plans or whatever, but
We agree that conceptually with you for a lot of reasons. So yeah, we agree with that.
yeah.
Do you have a question about the loop system?
Yes, are we there at that point? I just wanted to make sure that is the looped hydrant system or water line, is that gonna come off center, go up Sewell and go back down Nelson to Salem Street? To make a loop from Salem to Salem?
Yep, it's gonna come back down Nelson, and I believe there's gonna be the 8-inch line will be on Nelson for the storage facility anyway, so, but yeah, but I think it's drawn on there now. I'm pretty sure it's on Nelson Street now. It's revision, but yeah, will be looped.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure it was,
Yep.
And that's in condition H9, if you want to take a look at that.
Well, the
what we
reason
ha-
why I brought it up is because I think John was concerned about exactly where it was going. So that's why I brought it up, because it's not specifically stated in the condition, but I wanted to make sure that he had a chance to express.
So if it's
his-
already shown on the plans, should we say as shown on the plans?
fine. I just wanted to make sure it's looping off of Salem, not going up Sewell and then coming back around the buildings. And I hadn't seen the plans in a bit, so that's my fault. I apologize, but.
Yeah, no problem. We were staying off Nelson. In the beginning, we were coming back through the property and go in the top of Sewell and out the bottom for the loop. We tried a couple other things too with some neighboring properties to get it, because it's a tight loop. It's a small loop to get it out more down Salem. More
How
benefit.
is it looping now? It's looping from Salem Street through the project out Nelson Street?
I believe that's what the drawing shows now.
Good.
What the drawing, I don't think stipulated yet, because we haven't worked it out with the water department, and a sprinkler design is what the size of the pipe should be. I mean, that should be, we just haven't gotten that far yet. I don't believe in getting approval from the water department to size it as a 12-inch.
Yeah. Well, I
Okay.
just wanted to make sure, for firefighting purposes.
Yep.
Bigger the loop, the better. You can pull off of 2 different hydrants and not screw things up.
Right. It'll definitely be looped though.
But you're absolutely right, and it will be designed because they have to still measure once they're done with the sprinkler to make sure there's adequate pressure in the attics. There's a whole lot of stuff that will go into that ultimately in the final building designs.
Thank you.
Welcome, John.
Joel, do you want to jump back to your comment on the on-premise wording?
I think if you're concerned that there'll be staff that can review the tapes, remember, security cameras are not an active security of watching somebody as they come in. The security is intended as more of a forensic science to say that if something were to happen, they can pull up tapes, they can look at door logs, they can look at all sorts of things and work in conjunction to provide that to the police department to assist them as they may require. So I would rather try to focus sort of a statement here and maybe let Jason try to work that language out with Paul that sort of goes to that issue, that's what we're trying to do here and accomplish and will do to make that work. But we don't have a security guard staring at screens all day long. That's not what this system is designed for.
Yeah, and I never thought that to be the case. It was more of a concern of the police department, so I wanted to make sure it was addressed.
How about say something and such logs, both video and door logs to be provided to the police department as they may request, or something to the effect.
Work with Jay on that language. We all set with the fire and police conditions?
Finished. Sorry, I got the revised decision at 7:28 and I didn't realize it because I was already on the meeting. So I'm trying to go back and forth. So
Well, I didn't send it out till about 6:30, so it's really not your fault.
well, I didn't even realize it when you said something about the conditions were in G2 and I'm like, G2, I don't have G2. So that's when I found it. So I apologize. So, so are we all set with section H?
We
Or
just
did we-
removing the last one, H9, just references specific pipe sizing until it's designed. But it has to, we could stipulate something, but it has to be approved by the water department and the fire department. Or something to that effect, since we don't know yet what the requirements are.
Yes. In fact, that came from, I think that was your proposal. So that's where that 12.
I
inch
understand.
And yeah. So honestly, I'm not going to be out there measuring how wide the pipe is. If the fire department's fine with it, I'm fine with it. And the
Okay.
water department's fine with it, fine by me. I just want to
Okay.
make sure that it gets covered by them and they have some
Yes.
oversight.
Thank you.
So Paul, there'll be some mention of it in there that,
Absolutely.
okay.
So are we going to section I? Unless anything else in H?
Like the logical next step.
Captain Obvious. Did anybody on the board have any issues with section I? I know Paul had an issue with section I6.
Still don't know what that condition is supposed to say in terms of the sign.
Well, I think that I left it blank and didn't comment on it because we just hadn't discussed it. We were not very far apart from Mr. Dempsey with respect to signage. I thought that Chip laid out a really nice kind of signage that captured what he wanted to, essentially what Mr. Dempsey wanted to have anyway. So I didn't really see a need to veer from what we had proposed. It captured everything that you want to do in terms of warning people where the resource areas were and the work and everything else there. But I didn't want to be premature either. There were two competing versions. We didn't hate his signage, but we thought there was some overkill and some unnecessary stuff there. So we have a
My
proposal.
recollection is we kind of glossed over it and really didn't get an answer from either side on it.
Well, I mean, you have our proposal for it.
Mhm.
And I think when we were going through it, there were a number of things where we agreed with Dempsey, Mr. Dempsey on. This wasn't one of them. We felt our sign proposal was adequate and captured everything that the wetland stuff wanted to do. I know Chip's on the line, so I don't want to speak for him, but it struck me that our proposal would capture everything that this board would be looking for in terms of the kind of advanced warning and notice to people who may be wandering over there, and workers and staff and everything else. But so that's what we'd prefer to go with.
Chair, it doesn't matter to me. I just wanted to make sure I was including the right.
Sure.
language.
Yeah, I mean, I don't remember the board having an issue with our proposal for signage either. I think they recognized that they were just nuanced differences between the two of them when we were going through that list of stuff. It certainly didn't draw the kind of attention or discussion that some of the other wetland-oriented items had. So maybe that's why there wasn't a lot of direction for you, as we just kind of
Right, we kind
popped
of
over it. Yeah.
I had a question. If we're gonna use the non-sodium de-icing compounds, is a no fault sign even necessary?
Well, the fact that you're using non-sodium compounds, I think, the no salt sign reinforces that.
I mean, on the whole project, if the whole project, like, I guess that's gonna be written in the use of only non-sodium de-icing compounds are to be used on the project. I thought there was talk of that. The whole project would be like that, no?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah,
And-
that's the previous condition.
Right, and I think honestly, the intent of the signs, Bill, and I think this is what he was getting at, but I think it became more of a bigger issue, but it's really more of an alert to the guy who's actually dropping the salt. So,
Hopefully
because
not
if you get
dropping it.
a different guy, it's just a reminder to them, like, hey, make sure you have the non-sodium. And sometimes the plow guys, they put up their stakes anyway, and they can put little signs right on there. It's for their guys, really, just to remind them when they're coming in. That's
No,
really, I think, the intention.
I understand that, but for the most part, when you see these no salt signs or low salt signs, these are at wetland crossings. This isn't along a road, like, when you're driving along the Saco River or the Merrimack River, it's not all no salt because, now if it's going right over across, I get it. So, but if the whole project is using the non-sodium compounds, and that's in the decision.
But that's not. The decision states only non-sodium de-icing compounds are to be used within wetlands resource areas and/or buffer zones. So it doesn't prohibit it throughout the entire project site.
Okay, I must have misunderstood one of the last meetings. I thought the whole site was required to use that.
And remember, we don't like
It
salt.
would make sense for you to, Bill, I think you mentioned that that was basically going to be the plan anyway, but I'm not sure we added it explicitly.
Okay.
We don't want our sidewalks to fall apart. So the answer is we don't particularly like sodium products on concrete either. It doesn't really work particularly well. So I
Right,
think that
and I
was,
think we had talked about the fact that, if you put the salt, 10 feet away from the buffer, outside of that area, it doesn't mean it's not going to end up there anyway. So the idea was to just have it throughout the site that it wouldn't be used. That's all.
Right.
Because it travels. Rain comes, so, snow melts.
No, understood.
Okay.
Any other concerns with the wetlands conditions before I-15?
So Paul, on I-6, just to kind of close the loop on that, unless the board wants us to go back and kind of show them side by side, I don't recall an objection to the signage protocol that Chip laid out. I'd like to just insert that. It's pretty robust. Otherwise, we could take a look at them side by side.
The difference, Jay, was that Mike was at 100 feet and we were less than 100 feet. Paul, do you have a question about I-15?
Good, but I think we probably need to get some feedback from the board on I-6 first.
Okay. Well, again, we're looking to have, given the resource areas out there, what you don't want to have is 100 feet, which would be in the middle of the roadway in certain circumstances. So we'd identified a 25-foot area and number of signs, and that's what we had proposed.
And I thought we had discussed it, and then we all agreed that that was reasonable approach
Right.
in those areas. And that once we got past into the land being gifted where we no longer were owning that land, that the signage would no longer have to continue within that land area.
Because that's already taken care of by the conservation management permit, which is also referenced in the comprehensive permit.
Yeah, I don't recall having an issue with what we laid out and Chip put together on that.
So I do, Paul, do I need to send you that? How I laid that out in that letter? How do we resolve
I
that?
have that letter. I'm all set.
Okay.
So we're going to insert that as another red line for everybody to see that it's inserted.
If that resolves that, and if there were no other concerns before I-15, I did have a concern about the applicant's proposed modification to I-15.
Was your issue with respect to the 30 days, Paul?
It was only in the sense that my concern is 30 days can be a pretty long time to address the failure to correct an erosion control measure that's not working properly.
Yeah, I think 7 to 14 is something that would be responsible. Bill's out there, so it probably will be done overnight. It doesn't help anything. You've got another provision in here that we can't cause sedimentation into the wetlands. So, if we left the erosion controls out of repair for a period of time, then we'd have sedimentation. So it's going to happen very quickly. I agree. 30 days is, we don't need 30 days. I mean, we could go for anywhere 7 to 14 days.
Yeah, I put in 30 just because it's a typical thing on those cure provisions, Paul. I understand the need for the more immediate cure period for those circumstances. So, and there's obviously, as Chip said, there's other ramifications and incentives for us to do it in way less than 30 days anyway, because it opens up other violations. So yeah, change that as you see fit.
So, Mr. Chairman, I think that the proposal for 7 days is certainly sufficient. I don't think the town wants to be coming in there and trying to do the work on its own without giving the applicant, a fair amount of time to make the revisions themselves. But I do think once you go beyond that, you're leaving something uncorrected, that can cause real problems. So the town should have the ability at that point to just go forward and do the work itself.
And there is the longer, some of the things may not be strictly related to something that could cause an erosion thing or may take longer. So I think there's some ability to work with whoever's the town's consulting engineer or wetland monitor or whatever, if it's a fix that needs a little bit more time. So, but 7 days.
This provision applies specifically to erosion control measures. There's no other aspects of the development that this bond is applicable to.
Right.
Yeah, I don't see any issues with 7 days.
7 days is appropriate. In fact, I agree 30 days was way too long. So the other thing I had on this section, and maybe it's just more of a procedural thing that happens afterwards, but I don't know if it needs to be in here or not, is when does the applicant, at what point does the applicant get the money back? And how is that structured? Is that a certain amount of days after completion? Do they accrue any interest on that? Like, how does that work?
Well, I think it should be tied to when the areas certified to be stabilized, that we could present, a letter that's stabilized, because the purpose of the security is in the event that there's a problem with erosion. So to the extent that the site is stabilized, then I think the need for that security goes away.
With regard to the interest, I mean, it really would depend on the type of security that's provided. If there's a bond or if there's a tripartite agreement, it's not being put into an account that the town would be gaining interest on.
So, but I was, because one of the options was a
Lisa Nicola,
passbook,
you
so
sure?
that's why I was asking, is there, how does that work and what is the procedure? Now, Paul, obviously, Attorney Nyland just said that when it's stabilized, would you necessarily agree with that? Or is that typically how it's done?
Well, yes, there's no need to hold on to the security once the need for the stabilization is gone.
Okay, so does that just need to be documented, or is that just pretty much a?
I think it just needs to be a request from the applicant. They've got to show to whoever's overseeing the project for the town that they have completed the work in these areas, the stabilization is no longer required, and therefore the bond can be released.
We
Thank you for-
typically, in other planning projects, ask that they just provide a letter from their engineer with their certification stating that they've done such, so that we can add it to the record, so we have full confidence that somebody has reviewed it.
So a couple things we could do here, though, Kathy and Rebecca, if we're mirroring, which we are, kind of a basic subdivision kind of security, is we could backfill with kind of language that we would have in either a tri-party or a bond or passbook agreement, that along the lines, when we think we're done, we would submit it, and whether it's the town's construction monitor, engineer, or whoever is signing off on it, once they sign off on it, or once the board signs off on it, or whoever you want to sign off on it, we get the money back. But we would give you notice. Under subdivision, it's 45 days. Here, it doesn't have to be that. And when there's a sign off on that, we get the money back.
That's fine with me. Jay, if you want those language.
I'll get some language, or if Rebecca, if you have language in your subdivision agreement you'd like to put in, that's fine too, but it's pretty stock stuff, so we can tuck something on. I just made a note of it, so not that big of a deal.
Sounds good, thank you.
With respect to I-17, Paul, if we were already outlining the buffer zone for, essentially for protection, it seems that the first sentence is redundant, that you're asking for a border of the wetland resource area as well. I don't recall seeing that previously. It seems redundant.
I didn't make this up myself, Chip. It came from either your letter or it came from Mike's letter.
Yeah, I
don't
don't
think all of these conditions was kept track of the discussion that the board had between the two letters, and wherever there was consensus. Now I went with the language from that letter. So I presume maybe this came from Mr. Dempsey's letter.
Yeah, I wouldn't have recommended, because the purpose of having the other signage is to keep people out of the area. So I'm not sure why you would need that second line for the resource area itself when you've got one that's further landward of it. Just the first sentence. Everything else, I don't have a problem with anything else.
So are you saying that's already going to be marked out?
What I'm saying is that essentially you're going to have two lines of markings. We're going to have one that's more permanent for the 25 foot, but now we're going 25 feet further towards the riverfront area, and having another line, and it doesn't, just indicates there's going to be markers or flags, and it doesn't give an end date, while the others are meant to be permanent.
I presume that this is intended to be for construction purposes, to ensure that they don't accidentally intrude into the local wetland areas, except for where work has been authorized.
Well, if you want to add that for construction purposes, that would be fine. And then, so I'm more concerned about the long range application, Paul. If you want to say during construction, the border of and by the way, borders, BORDER, It could be marked and just leave it during construction and that'd be fine.
Okay, I've made that.
Okay.
All right, so I didn't have anything else in the wetlands conditions. I do see that Mr. Dempsey has posted something in the chat about the applicant's D1 proposed condition wasn't included.
I did have one more for I-20. There's a reference to an Army Corps of Engineers permit, and I'm not aware that there's an Army Corps permit required here.
So we can just add if necessary.
If necessary, would be fine.
Paul, what section were you about to refer to?
So I see in the chat that Mr. Dempsey has posted that the applicant's D1 proposed condition wasn't included. And again, what I did was I went through the conditions that were discussed when Mr. Dempsey was part of the discussion with the board, and some of his were included, some of conditions were included, and it's certainly possible that I may have neglected to include a particular condition. So I can go back and take a look at that.
Let us know in the next red line if you do find that something's missing.
Yep. That's all I have under I. Everyone else all set?
Yeah.
So then moving on to J, other general conditions. The applicant did have a comment regarding J7, which basically is a provision that sets forth a process in which the town can seek to enforce any violations or breaches of these conditions. And the applicant essentially asked, well, what about zoning enforcement? And of course, that is always an option, that the town can pursue as well. But this condition is just intended to the extent that it's possible to do so, provide some additional ability for the town to enforce the conditions.
I don't want to be, I mean, I guess this, the lawyers can hash this out. Do you even think there's the authority to enforce without going through zoning channels, Paul?
Like I said, to the extent that you can do it, it's better to have it in there than not have it in there from the board's perspective. And hopefully,
I'd feel more comfortable if at least
have to have a dispute over it.
If you're going to have enforcement, I would, if you want to leave those in there, that's fine. But I'd respectfully just add in the conventional zoning enforcement part too.
I'm happy to do that.
We're never going to violate anything, so it's a moot point.
You'll be the first developer ever.
Did have a housekeeping one on J5, Paul, with respect to stormwater management.
Mhm.
In each of the instances, you've given the applicant or the owner the right to cure, and there's no right to cure in that one. If you could add that.
Okay, I'll take a look at that. And that is it for the conditions, unless anybody has anything else. And we can move on to the waivers. And there are certainly, there's certainly a lot going on still with the waivers that can be discussed. So the first
red line I have on the waivers is under number 5. And that notes that the board would be denying a waiver as unnecessary because it's a procedural waiver that's not required. The comprehensive permit subsumes all other local permitting requirements. When I'm representing a developer, I always seek to be over-inclusive in the waiver requests. And I would request similar waivers as have been requested here. And when I'm representing boards, I always like to make sure that these requests stay in there and that the board acknowledges the fact that the waiver request wasn't necessary, because by application of the comprehensive permit law, all local permits are being granted as part of the comprehensive permit. It helps to eliminate potential confusion later on when somebody's reviewing it and they might say, hey, wait a minute, they didn't get a waiver of this special permit requirement. Well, if it's a procedural requirement, the waiver isn't necessary because the comprehensive permit is that special permit, that local board of health permit, that wetlands bylaw permit. So procedural waivers of these other permitting processes aren't required. But it's good to note in the waiver decision that the permit has already been granted for.
Hey, Paul, when you represent developers, what's your success rate of getting it included?
I'm not necessarily looking to get it included, actually, when I'm representing.
Okay.
I will propose during the process that the board do exactly this, which is to say that it's denied because it's unnecessary. All I'm looking to do when I'm representing a developer is to have it acknowledged so that at some point in the future, when we're actually in construction, somebody doesn't come along and say, hey, wait a minute, this waiver was never requested or granted.
I agree with that. I'd rather be on the safe side and say, yes, we reviewed it. Yes, we looked at it and here was the decision, as opposed to a question later.
It's always better to be clearer rather than more vague.
I agree.
Agreed.
My next question was on waiver request number 9.
You had a whole bunch of changes, Paul. This is, I know that your decision didn't take into account our second set of revisions.
Okay.
But those included an exact count, which our engineers had provided us as to the actual podium parking dimensions.
And so the smallest length is 19 feet?
No, 19.5, but it had exact widths, so it varied. Required waivers on width and length, but it laid it out. You were interested in some specificity, so they provided it to Joel, and I provided it in the draft. It just said so many spaces at this dimension, so many spaces at this dimension, so many at this dimension. So it was more exact as to what the plans show.
Okay.
If you want something more general that goes to the 19.5, we can do that.
Well, my question is that the waiver request seeks a waiver to reduce the length to 19 feet when the shortest length you're proposing is 19 and a half. So why aren't we just waiving it to 19 and a half feet?
That's fine. Which is when the information I provided, it also has a couple of spaces under 9, or at least one space under 9 wide. So
what is the width of that space?
I think there was one, it might have been adjacent to a handicap striped spot. I think it was 8.5. Hold on a sec. I can give you the exact numbers, unless Joel has it handy.
I'm not that quick.
All right, hold on a sec.
Please get it to me later too, Jay.
Yeah.
I was going to say, we'll provide it, make sure you have the specifics on this.
Bless you.
That's Alice. Paul. Yeah, they were.
Bless you, Alice.
Yeah, one space, a handicap space at 8.3 by 19.5, and then the rest of them are all over 9 and at 19 and a half. So. we'll work on that. We'll fill in the blanks, but we have all the exact data for you, Paul, but nothing under 19 and a half, according to the engineers.
And for number 10, I guess I wasn't clear on what exactly the waiver request was doing.
I got to defer to Bill and Joel on that.
I generally find it to be helpful when you're setting forth what the waiver request is, to be very specific as what the proposal is as compared to what the bylaw requires. And again, this lets anybody who's reviewing the permit know that the board, considered what the waiver was and what the impact of it was and knew exactly what it was doing when it granted that waiver.
If you forgive me, I will have for you inclusion in your next red line.
That's fine.
Specifics to that.
Mhm. All right, number 12, it goes to the signage. So again, we're going to circle back on that and see if we can get more specifics provided. Number 14, the applicant had some proposed changes. Jay, I don't know if you had a chance to review what I put in there, and is that what you were looking for?
Which is,
Item number 14.
Groveland Wetlands Protection Bylaw and Regulations, the applicant has requested a waiver of sections 2(1)J and section 14 as it relates to the treatment of buffer zones as resource areas in order to allow grading and driveway construction within buffer zones to allow for a total of 2.3 acres of buffer zone disturbance. No work will be conducted within 25 feet of any non-buffer zone wetlands resource area.
correct. Yeah, I wanted to give you a little bit more. I mean, obviously buffer zone is discussed throughout the wetland bylaw and regs, but I did want to drill down into it a little bit more at your request, so that's why. But you,
Okay,
that's all
so
consistent.
this waiver request is simply seeking to allow the applicant to construct the project as shown on the plans. So again, this is the sort of waiver, you know, if the board is presuming to grant the permit as requested, then this is a waiver that would be granted. Not hearing anyone tell me to do anything other than that, I'm just going to write that in as waiver granted, and we can revisit it when we go back through the waivers again. Next one, same thing, basically referencing the waiver request above.
Jay, you okay with the board action as bolded? It's not in red line, it's bolded as you work through this. I want to make sure you're focused on that.
Which one? I'm sorry.
Well, 16, 17, 18, board action is waiver denied. I wanted to make sure you were in agreement with those.
Yeah, yeah. This all captures the spirit of what Paul was just talking about.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you could confirm on 19 that waiver request isn't necessary and it's being withdrawn.
Yeah, I mean, it's just definitions. I mean, unless Chip has something in mind, it's definition section. I don't know why we're not trying to alter their definitions in any way.
And you requested what specific waivers you need, and those have been addressed.
You know, as you discussed earlier, Paul, I hadn't been through the waiver part of this process before, so I was looking to waive everything.
Again, that's always the safest approach.
Right, so that's why that was included. I do want to go back to 14 and 15 once you've finished.
Okay. You don't want to go back to them now?
We can do that. I mean, the issue is that I think the board's aware that we're, you know, legal determination with DEP with respect to the extent of the riverfront area. And depending on how that goes, the reference in there is that there will be no work within 25 feet of a non-buffer zone, which would be the riverfront. You know, the riverfront goes 200 feet, so it's a pretty extraordinary resource area. So if we could have, if that could be except riverfront area or something that, because it is possible that we could have, depending upon how that's resolved by settlement, by litigation or otherwise. I'm not worried about BVW and we'd stay away that, but the riverfront is the issue.
But I don't think they define riverfront any more strictly than the state does, do they?
No, they
Chip's point
don't.
is that the location of the riverfront may change depending on how that
Correct,
process comes out.
correct. And it
Well,
does,
if it ends up becoming riverfront rather than buffer zone, then there's gonna be other changes though. This
Right.
is all
That's
presumed
what I'm
that,
thinking is if the riverfront question comes out adverse to your position, you're likely going to have to come back and make some changes to the
yeah.
decision.
So right now, the waivers and the plans are designed as buffer, so I think we keep it as it is for now. And then riverfront will change things. We can move the roadway if we have to. We've already discussed it and change some of that stuff to avoid that, but you know, I don't want to forecast what's going on out there.
okay.
Number 21, again, I have waiver request withdrawn. Is that correct?
Yeah, I didn't see anything. The only thing, as I mentioned, Paul, in the subsequent, the last version that I sent to you is, and Chip actually raised this issue, not me, is that they have a slightly more expansive definition of, and then I'll turn it over to Chip too. So let's see.
Land subject to flooding. Is that what you're
Yeah.
talking about? Yeah.
Yeah, so what I said, what I sent to you yesterday or the day before was, I'm just scrolling down now. It says the applicant contends that the project is compliant with the dimensional regulations, but the Conservation Commission chair has suggested that the dimensional requirements for industrial and commercial projects apply. So this is on 21.
Right.
Okay.
So this is clearly a residential project, but Mr. Dempsey, in one of his pieces of correspondence, referenced it as a commercial project, not a residential project, in which that 100-foot would apply. So I want to, you know, this is clearly a residential project. I don't know why he characterizes a commercial project. But we want to make sure that that 100-foot doesn't apply because it's a residential project.
So I'll ask for the board's input on this. My view is all the board is making a determination on is the 40B application. It's most certainly an application for residential development. I don't think the board wants to overextend itself and start looking at other aspects of what's going on the site and determine whether or not those are industrial or not. Because again, you're not approving those. That's not something that's not attributable to this board's decision-making process, and I don't think you should get yourself caught up into.
Agreed. And if they make that judgment, then no waiver request is required, or waiver request is withdrawn.
I don't have any issues with that. I don't know if anybody else does.
I'm okay.
I'm okay.
Yeah, I'm okay with that. I think I understand why sometimes they can be confused, residential versus commercial, for financing purposes and things like that, but I think the actual use at this point is residential.
So on number 23,
Yeah, this is the one that I thought we were talking about. So, and Chip, I'll let Chip take over. The language I put in on Monday says and the second sentence would say the bylaw has an expansive definition of land subject to flooding as being any land subject to flooding or inundation by groundwater or surface water and land within 100 feet thereof. The applicant requests a waiver of any requirements to comply with requirements for such expansive resource areas and requests approval for the minimal buffer zone work shown on the plans. The applicant will comply with all requirements under the WPA. Chip, I think I got that correct, right? That was more your language?
Yeah, generally, when you're designing a project to stay out of the floodplain, it's an elevation of how high the water comes from either a river or if a coastal area from the ocean in a 100-year storm, it's an elevation. And so it's easily documented. The language in the bylaw states that if it could extend to anything that's inundated by water, and that could be, sheet flow coming from your neighbor that could inundate for a short period of time as it's heading, down gradient. So it's a very expansive and subjective definition. It's well beyond what everybody else defines it as. And that's why we're seeking a waiver to make sure we don't get caught up with somebody who says, oh, well, I saw some water over, some ponding over on that side. Even though it's really not flooding, it could just be sheet flow from a neighbor or otherwise. So that's why we asked for a waiver of that. So we're not asking to waive staying out of the floodplain. We clearly will meet those requirements. This is for those that are above and beyond and far more subjective.
So in this instance, it sort of sounds like it's one of those provisions that doesn't allow for a decision that is easily set forth. It says the requirement requires you to do this, the applicant wants to do this, and this is allowed or it's not allowed. In this instance, it seems a little bit more attenuated than that. And I think what we really should be looking at is whether or not the board understands what the applicant is requesting here.
So generally, you're right, Paul.
Probably would suffice to be able to, establish that the board has reviewed what the applicant is proposing. And then I think the board action can simply be waiver granted to allow construction as shown.
That would be fine. That would take care of it because, normally you go to the building inspector, you show him where the plan is, you show him where your elevations are. He takes a look at what the calculations are and what FEMA says where the floodplain is, and then you're permitted. It's something that all engineers can agree to, but with this language, we're beyond that. It's not something that I could calculate. So yeah, if we made it subject to as shown on the plans, that would satisfy my concern.
So if the board is comfortable with that, I can put that in.
Yeah, I think I'm comfortable with that. I know we've had water issues in other sites that are not within the floodplain, but for this site, I'm not really that concerned about it.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with it.
I'm
And we
good.
have had a stormwater review that's we've passed. So. Thank you.
All right, then we've got a new condition in number 26.
Yeah, sorry, I put it down as 27, it's 26.
Jay, if you want to explain that.
Yeah, so we talked a little bit about the land disturbance bylaw last time. And Chip and I took a look at it. Most of it is procedural because it's captured within the stormwater review and all the other land disturbance review that your civil did. So in some part, it's procedural and no waiver really request is required. And then I just accepted a little bit, section 14.9, which requires a performance guarantee because we're doing other performance guarantees throughout the permit. And 14.10 and 14.11, which have certain inspectional protocols and requirements for final reports. And there's also a lot of inspectional requirements within the comp permit too. So those were the only substantive parts that I saw, and it's kind of mixed procedure and substance. So that was I just didn't want to leave that box unchecked. I think it largely goes the way of some of the other ones that Paul's talked about, but we did discuss it, so I wanted to round out that issue.
And leaving aside the comment that I had put, I think this is fine. Clear enough as to which provisions they are seeking waivers. Mainly procedural, but I think waiver granted here is probably the best approach, because it's a little question as to whether or not it's procedural or substantive, but it does indicate exactly what it is they're looking for.
Right.
And that's all I have on the waivers. So that leaves us with one big question still to be answered, and that's the number of units.
So does the board want to discuss this, or do you, I think we decided, I guess, that we would make a decision tonight. Do you guys want to chat it out and figure out what you want to do? Somebody want to make a proposal, maybe?
And of course, you might expect that I have some comments to make in support thereof if you wish me to do so.
By all means.
You know, there's a couple points I figured I just wanted to make as you consider this very important question. We spent a lot of time together. We always said that we would analyze the project at 192 to first make sure that it worked from a stormwater basis, a traffic basis, circulation, and we spent a lot of time doing that. As you all know, currently today, the town only has about 3.3% of affordability. There's 80 units currently today, based on what DHCD reported last in the last census of 2,423 units. You know, I looked at one study by Applied Geographic Solutions, and it's true, we don't know yet the census and what it says, but their projections is that the town would need, in order to comply with 10% affordability and obtain safe harbor, which is, I think, an important consideration, 175 additional units to the 80 that's currently in their inventory. And so when we talk about 192, what it would end up providing for you all is the ability to be safe harbor. And safe harbor is an important aspect that I really hope you all consider, because what it says is it's not that you'll never accept or consider a 40B project in the future, but in that particular case, you get to decide for yourselves where it's appropriate and where it's not, and you're sort of in control of that. In 2007, the town did a housing production plan and discussed its need to bring on a certain amount of affordability every year. As part of that, it's been unable to achieve that. But one of the things it did in that report, it cited certain land parcels in the town it deemed most suitable for 40B. And this particular parcel was called out in that report for that purpose. You know, the town, in its efforts to want to provide a diversified type of housing for people to live in the town, not everybody wants single family homes. This project also fills an important aspect and then provides a certain amount of affordability at 80% of the median household income. In addition to that, it will be subject to its regulatory agreement, providing a lottery and affirmative marketing plan to give local preference to the town and its residents. And again, I know I don't want to belabor and go through line by line, but we worked through a lot of issues and questions, some of them even tonight, about traffic, sightlines, crosswalks, fire protection, coverage, and in all aspects of everything that we talked about it in terms of how 192 unit would work on this project. And clearly we were able to demonstrate, even with architectural perspectives and how it would look, that in fact that this was an appropriate and suitable location for such a project. In addition, it should be noted, though it's certainly not unto itself the only reason, because we don't know, at least I am not privy to know what happens in the background. But, you know, we've been at this for a very long period of time. And while we've occasionally had somebody come in and want to make a comment and discuss boundaries or access on Nelson Street, we've not really had people who've rallied up and objected, at least that I'm aware of, and maybe in the background they have, to say that this is an inappropriate use for this project. This project is the perfect story, and I'm almost done, I promise, the perfect story of redevelopment. There was, whether appropriate or not, taken and chopped up into a quarry, creating an unsafe condition. Here you have an applicant who came along, went through extensive permitting to fill that site appropriately and take away the safety hazard, and then turn around something that was terribly left in condition and propose a project that the town itself in its vision said would be appropriate for this particular site. And in doing so, has gone and extensively provided additional land to be donated for conservation, protection of habitat, and demonstrated that in fact it can meet all the stormwater standards and everything to be appropriate for its location. So with that, you know, again, it's type of housing that I think is important for diversification. It's modern, it's apartment, it's amenity driven, it's renters by choice, and in that also providing affordability. And I hope you all strongly, you've been very, very patient. And I have to say, I've truly, and I'm not trying to kiss up, but you guys have been great in the fact that you have asked appropriate questions and drilled us to make sure, in fact, we could stand up the test. And I hope for all that, you will favorably vote for 192. And thank you for allowing me to indulge with those closing comments.
Thank you, Joe. Any other thoughts on the board in terms of a particular concern, one way or the other?
But
Kathy, we can't hear you again.
Oh, there you are.
there I am.
Oh, we
Am I
heard that.
here?
Yep.
I was just saying, I think we've talked about it a lot already, so, but if you guys, do you guys have any comments about one way or the other? Do you feel one way or the other? Someone want to make a motion, comment, something?
Well, Joel
Um,
said that if we get to 175, we would be probably able to declare safe harbor again until we get a program for the town's planning board and stuff for, we could declare a safe harbor and then see what kind of plan they make for the future of Groveland. This would give us a little time, I think, if we went to the 192. I don't know how the other members feel about that, but that's one of the things I'm weighing, is to buy us a little time to get our own house in order for the town of Groveland, to see what kind of plans we can put together for growing it, you know, slowly, once we get this, if we get this at 192.
No, and I think I'm thinking along the same lines as John, is that, you know, my worry would be what happens if we grant less than the 192, and, you know, the census that closed 6 days ago, you know, what those numbers will look like and what that'll do to our percentage going forward.
So I think the board does need to take into account the fact that you've got an application that was originally for 192, then was reduced to 144. And technically the 144 unit project is what is in front of the board. You can't really require the applicant to build 175 units. If you issue a decision that is not 192 units, they may simply decide to take the 144 unit development as proposed, construct that, and then see, you know, what their rights would be in the future with the rest of the site. And I don't know where the 175 figure gets you in terms of the 10%, but the board needs to also consider the fact that we are in the middle of the decennial census. And by next year, we'll have the figures out and there will be units added to the town's total number of year-round housing units. That'll push up the required number of affordable units that you need to have to hit your 10%. So I don't know if this 175 was looking at gaining a 1 or 2 year safe harbor under the housing production plan safe harbor. But if you get enough units to actually get you over 10% and stay over 10%, even after the decennial census comes out, you're getting at minimum 10 years until the next census comes out.
So
Yeah, I assume from
Agreed.
Joel's, I just assume from Joel's statement, I believe they mentioned that that was just an estimate put together based on the assumptions of the coming census and not a strict number for anything that is known.
That is correct.
procedurally, what do we need to do then? I thought we were looking at 192 and 140, whatever it was, at the same time. Do we need to say no to and yes to another?
I think, I mean, unless the applicant, wants to indicate that they're willing to consider a number between 144 and 192, I think you're sort of limited to either or.
That's,
Because it's not, this is a sort of a typical circumstance where, sometimes you'll have a project that is, a 200 unit project, and the board may say, we're going to issue a decision that approves 160 units. Well, that reduction, is a reduction from what was actually requested by the applicant. In this instance, what you really would be doing is requiring an increase in the number of units, but not consistent with what the applicant's other proposal was. So I don't know that there's any ability for the board to actually require the applicants to essentially construct another half a building rather than a full building.
no, I that wasn't my implication. I meant 192. That's what I meant.
Yeah.
Oh,
like-
okay, yeah.
75 I got from Joel, but the 192 would put us theoretically over that for a while.
And I think it gives you some breathing room as well.
Agreed.
And the
So I
question
guess
needs
that-
to be for the rest of the board is to look at the difference between 192 units and 144 units and determine as whether or not there are project impacts that would be sufficiently reduced that makes it worthwhile for the board to approve a lower number of units, recognizing that there's the potential for either additional units on this site sometime in the future or an additional large project somewhere else in town in the future, because you wouldn't have the benefit of the safe harbor after your housing production plan safe harbor expired.
So I think we can take a vote on the 192. And before we do that, I just want to ask Paul, should we waive the other restriction we have as part of that, or
Waive what?
the
Safe harbor
I
that
forget
we-
the term.
that we asserted at the start.
Yeah,
of
the safe harbor
process?
that we had from the beginning.
you
Should
don't
we
have to
waive that
waive.
now,
So-
or?
The board asserted the safe harbor, but the notice that we provided to the applicant specifically stated we're willing to move forward and consider the application as proposed. We don't need to waive it.
Okay.
The decision acknowledges that the safe harbor notice was provided, but that doesn't prohibit you from issuing a decision for the full number of units.
Okay. Yeah, I just wasn't sure how to waive or how to word the vote. Then I will make a motion to proceed with the 192 units.
And Mr. Chairman, I just
Yes.
want to make sure we're doing this correctly. We're not doing a motion to actually approve right now. We're really doing a motion to finalize
Yep.
the decision based upon 190.
That's why I said
Right,
to
'cause I don't wanna-
proceed with the
I don't want to
192
start
units
the clock in terms of
plan.
it being construed that the town closed the public hearing and voted to approve the project, and then that would give us only 40 days to finalize the decision. If we're going to continue this and take additional information, then the board's vote should be simply, an instruction to move forwards based upon 192.
Yeah. So I would make a motion to move forward with the 192 unit plan as our definitive plan on what we're going to decide here. I don't know how to word that legally, but I think we're close
that was
enough, right?
Seconded.
All those in favor, John Stokes,
Aye.
Kathy Franson,
I think she said aye, but I couldn't hear her.
I did say aye.
she definitely said aye. I mean, I could read those lips well enough.
read
No.
those.
Her microphone's
hold the
not picking up
sign?
very quickly.
Yes.
Chris Goodwin,
Aye.
and I, Jason Normand.
Very good. So we'll work on getting the rest of the missing information, get all the blanks filled, and hopefully be ready to close this out at the next hearing,
Very
Excellent
good.
news.
which will be when?
So November 4th, we're looking at?
So the November 4th meeting was for
Oh, that's right. That's right.
application. So I don't know if the board wants to add this in addition to that application, or if it wants to take some more time to finalize all of the documents and present that at the following meeting, which would be November 8th.
18th.
I am available on the 18th.
Okay, 18.
I'd like to tell you I'm going on vacation, but where can we go? That 18th is fine from us too.
All right.
Can I-
Liz?
Can I just make a request though, Paul? How long do you think it would take you to put the revisions together?
Taking me very long is, it's going to be based upon, I'm waiting for some additional information to come back to me. So once I get that, probably a day or two.
I just wanted to make sure.
Most of what we have discussed tonight, I've already made, because they're already in the ongoing draft.
That you're very efficient.
And I
But
have
I
two
know that
homework
we were-
assignments.
But I know that you're gonna have to get some information from them. And so I just want to make sure that we have plenty of time to review it long before the 18th. So if there is anything that pops up, we can
So
have plenty of time to review it.
I will calendar it to make sure I get you the draft a week in advance of that.
That would be very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
By November 11th.
So the 18th at 7:30, that's what we're doing?
Cool.
All right. It's a date.
But just to touch base on the entrance sign, you guys want to, if I could put together a landscape package with some sort of entrance sign, that's what we do for the next meeting, right?
Yeah, Bill, you and I will discuss and review that. And as I said before, I think we bifurcated the two packages so that, I think for the sign at the entry, we could probably talk about size, and then we could probably talk about where or what type of signage would go throughout. So let us work on it. We'll see if we can get something to Rebecca early next or mid next week.
Yep, no problem. Thank you. And the frontages on the other two streets.
Well, thank you for your courtesies.
Yeah. I would like to make a motion to continue the public hearing of application 2019-3, I believe it is, to the November 18th meeting at 7:30, not the November 4th, which will be another application. Just to cover it for anybody listening. All those in favor? John Stokes,
Aye.
Kathy Franson, Chris Goodwin,
Aye.
aye.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you all very much and please be safe.
Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So first we have minutes.
Did everyone get a chance to review them?
Hmm.
I thought they looked good. I had no suggested changes. So I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from Wednesday, October 7th, 2020.
Seconded.
John Stokes,
Aye.
Kathy Francis,
Aye.
and Chris Goodwin.
Aye.
And I.
I actually have
Thank-
one question for Rebecca. Are you with us?
Yes, I am.
So, yeah, I was wondering if the new member that we have is planning to attend on November 4th? Or the first one?
Yes, so I was going to update the board. I did reach out to him after our last meeting and kind of stated, hey, you know, this would be a perfect opportunity to listen in and be part of the application from the get-go. And I didn't hear anything back. So that would be the third email that I had sent and have not heard a response from. So I double checked on the email address. I thought maybe I had it wrong. So I sent it to the 2 email addresses I had. So I can contact the town clerk's office and see if I can get a telephone number and follow up with him by phone. But I mean, he was responding to email. So I'm just not too sure, to be honest with you.
Okay, yeah, I was just thinking it would be a really good opportunity for him to get his feet wet. Basically.
No, for sure. And I even said that in the email that I wrote him and said that I would be happy to meet with him in person and we could go through the application process and what they're seeking relief from and go through the bylaw and all that other stuff. And again, he hadn't got back to me, but I will continue to try and make sure that I update the board once I get a response.
Thank you.
And along those lines, I just wanted to let the board know that at the request that you had made the last meeting, I did talk to Sam Joslin, the building commissioner, and he will be able to join us remotely on the November 4th meeting. Also to let you know that the abutter notification for the 301 Main Street project has been sent out and the legal ad ran for its first time in the Eagle Tribune on Monday.
Great. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you.
Oh, one last thing, Rebecca. Do you think that when Paul has a draft ready after tonight's meeting, that we could ask Sam to just take a quick look at it before we go to final vote?
I'm sorry, I should have told you as well. I did send him an email after you had made that request and he's already reviewed the decision that was drafted this evening. He actually added a couple of comments in there about the fire safety and some of the building codes, but I can certainly share with him again, but he did provide input.
Oh, great. Okay.
Just reviewed this evening.
Yeah, because I think it's going to be challenging to do zoning enforcement. So I just want to make sure that we've dotted our i's and crossed our t's and don't miss anything that he definitely needs to do any enforcement if necessary.
100%. And I forwarded him your email and he said that he appreciated you taking him into consideration.
Well, because I can imagine on his end, it can be a little, because he has no say and then he has to just live with whatever. And if he had wanted to change a few words, I think it's good to know that now.
For sure. I'll send him the updated version.
Okay, thank you. So can I make a motion to adjourn at 9:16 p.m.?
Seconded.
John,
Aye.
Kathy,
Aye.
Chris,
Aye.
and I.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Have a good night.
Stay safe, everybody.
Talk to you
See
soon.
you in a couple weeks.
Bye-bye.
All right, bye.